Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. Today I'm here to talk about how the new 3 promoted teams could break the Premier League's relegation curse. Right, I've got a really special video for you today. So during the international break, we're going to focus on the 3 that have come up, and I've been somewhat inspired by this piece, not only because I've watched Sunderland, I've watched Burnley and I've watched Leeds already this season, all 3 of them in their opening games. But just right off the top, I want to show you basically a table that we've got, but also some lines of, percentages and how well they've actually started in the league. So their combined points total of 13 is 22% of what the 3 promoted teams managed in the total of last season. It's the most by 3 promoted sides across the opening 3 match days since 16-17. To caveat that, or to add to that, we've got the list of the points earned by the promoted teams from match day 1 to match day 3. And we can see the teams that have got above 10, 13 in 16-17, Burnley stayed up that season. In 17-18, 11, we had Huddersfield, Brighton, Newcastle all stayed up. 19-20, we had 10, which Villa and Norwich stayed up in. And then 22-23, we had Fulham, Bournemouth and Forest. All of them teams stayed up following their season promoted to the Premier League. And this season, we're on the second highest total in them last 10 seasons, which is 13. And obviously, I think one thing to keep in mind straight away is obviously the teams they're playing against. They've had pretty favourable starts to the season in terms of going off the fixture schedule and how they've managed it. But I think Burnley actually have obviously played Manchester United away and Tottenham away, and they've still got a win out of their first 3 games. So that is why this piece is going to be such a big one and such a sort of positive one for the 3 who have come up, because I think for me, looking at the Premier League, we want it to be the best league in the world and we want it to be the most competitive. I'm looking at the Premier League this season and I'm struggling to pick 3 teams who I think would go down. And that is a genuine good reflection on the league's competitiveness. So I'm going to go through each team one by one, talk about the signings they've made, the tactics, the manager, how well they've started the season, some key points for each team. And yeah, it's going to be a really interesting video, and I've got a lot of cue cards here to go through. So just bear with me, but we are going to move on in to our first team, which is Sunderland. So starting with Sunderland, the first newly promoted team to win 2 of their 3 opening fixtures since Marcelo Bielsa's Leeds in 2021. So it's obviously Sunderland got 2 wins in their first 2 home games against West Ham and Brentford. Now, straight away, I want to talk about the Stadium of Light, because I watched the opening day fixture against West Ham and it was bouncing. And I think the Isidore winner, it's incredible. I think their ground could really become, similar to Ellen Road, a real fortress for these teams. So I just want to go in straight away to talking about what Sunderland do. And I can't go further without talking about the signing of Granit Xhaka from Leverkusen. So on paper, Sunderland are setting up in a 4-3-3. Now, I watched the Brentford game. They do something really interesting, which I really am in favour of. So you can imagine we could push these counters on as if they were building sort of high. So in the early stages of the Brentford game, we actually saw Sunderland playing really aggressive against Brentford and sort of challenging them to step out. Now, their new keeper, who's a 22-year-old Dutchman called Roofs, he's actually been stepping up very high into the back line and almost becoming a pure outfielder. Now, what this means is they wanted to create somewhat of these left-sided overloads. So we had Enzo Lafy here, who was coming a little bit more narrow. If you watched him in his time at Lorient and even Roma, he was much more of a number 10. So we're looking to push him in. We've got Reinildo, who Sunderland signed on a free from Atletico Madrid, who, if you've watched Atletico Madrid, he's going to cause some wingers a lot of problems in games. And then, as we can imagine, we've got the left centre-half and the right centre-half splitting really wide. And this means we can sort of bomb on and push back with our forward 5 against Brentford and pin them back, meaning they can't really step out to engage onto Sunderland. Now, Granit Xhaka, as I've mentioned before, has been sort of incredible in these opening 3 games, especially the 2 home games he played. So he's been playing somewhat of this half-back role. Now, if you aren't familiar with the term, I only know it off Football Manager, but he splits the centre-halves and almost joins in with the 3. And that means if the keeper wants to step up into the back line to actually play with the ball, before you know it, Sunderland have got sort of this 4v3 overload here against Brentford's wide side. And obviously, Siddiqui is a player who likes to drop out into these areas and actually pick up the ball and progress the ball. But I think sort of the midfield construction is really, really positive. I really love Siddiqui's performance against Brentford, sort of his positional understanding of where to be on the pitch. Can we go here? Can we go there? Can we actually push this guy on? Can we move there? And sort of the fluid rotations they've sort of shown off really early in the Premier League season has been really encouraging. Straight away, I want to talk about Sunderland have actually scored 4 of their 5 goals this season in open play from crosses. Now, we all seen the Mayenda header against West Ham, but the genuine instinct to cross, and if you watched Granit Xhaka under Mikel Arteta, I think it was in 22-23, when he was actually playing much more of a left-sided player, these in-swinging balls, and he actually got an assist for this at the game week just gone, these in-swinging balls are an absolutely deadly tool. And I'm really, really encouraged by what Sunderland have done, not just on the pitch, because they've actually been quite versatile in terms of they can do this against Brentford, but if you watch them in the West Ham game, they're actually pinned into their own box. And I'll move the counters back just quickly to show you sort of how they're resisting so much pressure. So out of all the sides in the Premier League, Sunderland actually rank 5th best in the league for XG against from open play. Leeds is actually number 2 as well, so we'll cover that. But I want to just show you here what they do. So you can imagine that this is Brentford, and let's just push their players on. So they're creating that flat line of 5 against Sunderland's build-up. Now, what Sunderland have been doing, and I've actually wrote about this, like I've wrote a genuine piece about it, so it's so refreshing to see these ideas come into fruition. But most teams build up with a back 3 against a back 2 just to overload it, and that means we can push these sort of spare men on. In the 4-4-2, the outside midfielder, when they're dealing with these overloads, is actually prepared to drop into these left wing back spaces and protect their fullback. And most importantly, sort of crowd out this area for the opposition team so they can't just deliver balls into the box and be like man for man in the box. They always want like a 1-man plus advantage. And that means sort of the other midfielders follow along. Now, this has been visible on both sides. I think Enzo Lafay was a player who was probably highly rated in Ligue 1, but as soon as he's moved there, the instant things that I've noticed is sort of the work rate, the off-ball stuff that has really, really appealed to me. And they've got 2 really, really fast breakaway players. And this is where I look at Sunderland, and I think they have got a genuine dynamism in their game to play. As we said, pushing on, getting the keeper involved, third centre-halves, pushing all this left-wing stuff on, getting the rotations, getting the ball, breaking through. But now, we've also got a Sunderland that has got a phenomenal defensive record in their sort of first 3 games in terms of their open play XG conceded. We've now got a position where they can actually be really compact, really stubborn, but they can have the pace and they can have sort of the relentlessness to play on the break and get in behind these higher line teams. And I think at the Stadium of Light, I think the Black Cats are going to cause serious problems. I think they could honestly cause some problems. If you watch the game against West Ham, it's a slow possession team with somewhat immobile defenders in the back line. These 2 players are going to cause a lot of problems. And I think in general, their sort of recruitment in the summer has been pretty spot on. So I've got here, Habib Diarra was probably their most expensive sign of the summer for €31.5 million, and he plays somewhat of this right centre midfielder. This is an incredible player. Energetic, both boxes, likes the ball to feet, demands a lot, has a lot of these sort of moments where if he comes to the ball, we have these counter movements of these Sunderland players sort of making these runs off him. And I really like that sort of idea from Sunderland to draw on the press, come close to the ball, but then can we get runners in behind against these higher lines? And I really like that. Simon Adingra, from Brighton. Again, Premier League proven winger. One of the signings I was actually looking forward to watching the most. He plays on this left wing, so we're talking about having that pace in behind. If Enzo Lafay's maybe more inside, Adingra's a great option to have there. We've got Talbi from Bruges, €20 million. Really exciting young player. Nordi Mukiele, who's just signed on a free. He's playing as right centre-half in their most recent game, and he looks to be a real good player, especially when Sunderland want to create, them back 3 situations in the build-up. He's always been this player who's playing a little bit more as a wide right centre-half throughout his career, and they profile him really well to do that. But more importantly, I want to talk about a lone player just before we move on. So after all these signings, Sunderland have actually got the 2nd youngest squad in the Premier League on average now, behind Chelsea. But one signing they've made, which is a real good one, is Gertrude from Leipzig on loan. This is a player who won the title with Feyenoord when Arne Slot was there. And when I was studying Arne Slot at Feyenoord, he was a menace. He's unbelievable. Sort of can do all the build-up stuff, can do all the defending stuff, can invert into midfield, can probably play right centre-half in a 3, can bomb on forward. I think that's a real good coup for Sunderland. And if I'm being honest, when I was watching all the teams, I do think Leeds have got a more controlled manner to their play. But I think Sunderland, for me, especially with the stadium light and the 2 home games that I've watched so far, I think this could be a real team in the Premier League. And I think their recruitment has just been sort of fresh ideas bringing to the Premier League. And yeah, that's the first team we've covered. So now we're going to move on into sort of Daniel Farke's Leeds and how they stand a chance to maybe stay up in the Prem. If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications. Right, now moving on to Leeds United. So Leeds are the first newly promoted team in the league to keep 2 clean sheets in their 3 opening match days since Brentford in 2021-22. Now, Leeds are a bit much more of a not conventional side by any means, but I think Daniel Farke's got a lot more quality in his team already from the season from last season. So I want to explain to you what they're doing and sort of how more, not simplistic, but sort of empowering their model is to try and get their players in the best positions. And it's a very easy to understand formula at Leeds. And I think whether or not that's a good thing, I don't know. But for me, this was like the most tactically identifiable team out of the lot. So I think for the most part, they like to build with sort of split 8s and 1 sitting midfielder. In the edge of their own box in build-up, they do like to drag 1 in and move 1 inside and have the fullbacks a bit narrower. Now, what I was noticing when I was watching Leeds is the amount of responsibility that is on the fullbacks and the number 8s. If you watch the game against Everton on their opening matchday fixture on Monday night, what they were doing, which I found was really interesting, and this is something I've often praised Pep Guardiola teams for, other teams for. If we just move the counters up so they're attacking, when they get into the final third, Jayden Bogle, especially on this side, linking up with Dan James, these runs from Jayden Bogle, and it's a signature move sort of on the left as well with Goodmanson, who's a brand new sign, who's looked really sharp so far. These moves around the outside, but also these in darts here, are really good at taking advantage of sort of the space that a low block offers or a mid block. Everton could not get out of their half, and this is a team that's obviously gone on to win their next 2 games, but Everton could not get out of their own half at Ellen Road, not just because of sort of the occasion for Leeds, but because of how good they were tactically. And now, they do this on both sides, but these number 8s are also players who like to do these tandem movements. You want to swing in from here into the midfield like this. They've got Sean Longstaff, Anton Stack, who they've signed, who's one of the better purchases for me from the promoted teams. I think he's going to be a really good addition to the Premier League. Very physical, very durable, very robust in sort of his movements. But Ethan Ampadu is sort of the player who's been playing these deeper midfield roles. Now, if you don't know about Ethan Ampadu, he's been a really rare case of someone who can play centre-half and number 6. So he's comfortable in doing both things. Now, what this means is that he actually has the flexibility. If the fullbacks push on, he slots in there, the back line shifts across, and then they drop a midfielder in. And this, again, gets that same thing as what we were talking about with Sunderland. It gets that same thing here where you've got 3 bodies taking advantage of somewhat of a low and sort of underloaded side for an opposition team. So I think Leeds are going to be a really interesting one, just simply for the fact that I think they have spent the lowest of the promoted teams to come up. Now, in the Championship last season, they were probably one of the best teams I've seen in the last few seasons in the Championship, just outright. I think the quality they have in the squad is brilliant. And another thing they were doing sort of against Everton, if I actually just show you, they are pressing in somewhat of this, I want to say it's like a diamond, but if you just take it here, so looking at a 4-3-3 build-up, they were timing their jumps. So we've actually got 2 strikers leading the press, 1 sitting on the holding midfielder, and they were timing these jumps. So if we can actually push this a little bit back, Pascal Struijk and Joe Rodon are actually ones responsible for stepping up with the press, and it's a little bit more situational, so that if Everton or another team would try to drop a body into midfield, this player then situationally jumps if he's trying to get a 4v3 in this centre of midfield here. So that's something that Joe Rodon and Pascal Struijk have been doing. But I think their timing of their jumps, they sort of leave the fullbacks as the spare man. So you can imagine here that the most obvious outball from this situation is to go to the right back. As soon as that right back is played, or if he's played, because we like to use these curved runs to sort of force the ball down the other side, the jumping from Daniel Farke's Leeds, the locking off. We often speak about locking off on this channel. Can we sort of pin them to one side? And I think that has been one of their best sort of tools, not just their ability to hold the ball. I think Tanaka as well in midfield, the Japanese lad, he is amazing at sort of doing them rotations in midfield, in out of back line, taking the ball in them pockets. But their press and their ability to hold the ball and actually play against sort of the lesser teams in the Premier League as if they were in the Championship is sort of something that they've not had to change much of their style from going from the Championship to the Premier League. I don't doubt against bigger teams and better oppositions they will sort of change, but we've not seen, in the last few seasons, we've seen managers come up and try and sort of play this way without taking into account results or taking into account anything like that. I don't see that with these three teams. I think all three teams have somewhat adapted to different strategies. Obviously suffered a massive defeat to Arsenal, but I think people forgetting that 5-0 against Arsenal, Leeds actually should have been 1-0 up. They had a really good chance off a corner very early on in the game, and they should have taken it. So I think definitely look at Leeds as to be one of them teams. As we mentioned before about the XG from open play against, Sunderland are 5th on that table. Again, it's only 3 games, so it's a very, very small sample size. Leeds are 2nd. So that is a testament to how good Leeds are, not just at defending their own box and actually pinning them high with the ball, but the pressing. They can press for the life of it. And yeah, really, really excited by what I've seen from Leeds, and I like how much they've sort of not strayed too much from what they're doing. So yeah, we are going to move on into the last section now, which is Burnley. But I think these two, before we go on into Burnley, stand the best chance for me. I think Leeds and Sunderland can play in sort of different ways to actually take advantage of, the lesser teams. And I think they can build up a lot of points through defending low, playing on the counter-attack. The only thing I'm being a bit curious about with Leeds is the lack of firepower up front. Dominic Calvert-Lewin did look sharp off the bench in the last game, but I think the other teams, Isidore, Mayenda, Lyle Foster, Jadon Anthony, for the other two teams that have come up, they've got off the mark for their clubs. They've got off the mark and they've sort of made it stick, and I just don't know if Leeds can, develop that sort of goal-scoring prowess without that clinical goal scorer. But I hope, for Leeds' sake and for Calvert-Lewin's sake, that he can be the man, because he does need that in his career, and I think it would be a perfect time to sort of have that 10-goal Premier League season where you keep a team up and you keep them firing. So, very interesting approach from Leeds, but we are going to move on now into the last team, which is Burnley. Right, now on into our final section, which is on Scott Parker's Burnley. Now, obviously, this is a team that's been up and down in the Premier League. I want to touch on what they've changed so far this season. Obviously, right off the top, conceding just 16 goals in 46 matches, Burnley set the best defensive record in English League history. At one point in the season last season, they went 12 successive league matches without conceding a goal between December and March. Straight away, this is a team that sort of had a ridiculously good defensive record in the Championship. Now, I am just going to throw up on the screen their shots against graphic so far in the Premier League. And we can see that not just is their XG per shot against quite high, but their XG conceded overall is quite high. They've had 6.7 against, 5 goals conceded, which means Martin Dubravka's actually putting up some pretty decent saves in the United game especially. So, but on that graph, you can see a lot of sort of clusters around the 6-yard box. Now, I don't think the defensive record is somewhat replicable, because I think they had a lot of the ball last season. I think that was mainly down to, why they were so good at sort of defending against, but with the ball, like defending with the ball, not just defending in their 6-yard box. Now, what they've been doing, these are actually one of the only teams, or the only team really, that have come up from the Championship who build with 2 people in midfield quite consistently. So Leeds and Sunderland all build with sort of Ethan Ampadu, Granit Xhaka in this hole, making these movements in and out the back line. They build with Leslie Ugachukwu and Joe Cullen. Now, what they do is they actually like to sort of, in deep build-up, so you can imagine sort of push on the press again, as we were doing before. If we push the press on, so now we can see that Burnley in the red counters are building with this sort of two-man partnership. Hannibal Mabry stands next to Lyle Foster, and that sort of gives this number 6 a question of who does he go to? Does he stay in this space and make it a 3v2, or does he actually help his centre-half and let his centre-halves go 2v1 with the striker? That's sort of the big question that Hannibal Mabry is asking throughout these sort of games. Now, a lot has been made of the other two teams' transfers in from the Championship up. Burnley have had a bit of a speculative summer. So obviously they signed Leslie Ugachukwu, who from Chelsea, who I believe is an amazing, amazing player. I thought he played incredibly well against Manchester United at the weekend. They've also signed Armand Yobroya, Bashir Humphreys, Hartman, Marcus Edwards went through on a loan to buy, Jadon Anthony, Liam Fleming, Brun Larson. Florentino Luis on a loan from Benfica is one of the better signings on this list for me. Player I've watched a lot in the Champions League, who's sort of been this anchor, probably might take Joe Cullen's place, but also provide depth and maybe stodge out the midfield if we want to drop in a third one. But yeah, I think there's definitely going to be sort of improvements here. The one signing they have made, which is obviously the biggest one in terms of stature, is Kyle Walker. Now, for City, we often seen that Kyle Walker was making these like shifts, not as an overlapping right back, but sort of tuck inside, and then we push this along, and then we get Jadon Anthony nearer to goal, and then we can push the left back on. Now, that has pretty much been what Burnley have done. Similar to City, two-man pivot, Kyle Walker playing this sort of rest defence role where if they want to counter-attack through the channels, whilst he's not in top physical condition, he still can keep up with most Premier League footballers in this channel. And then that gives us sort of this ability to go tandem with Joe Cullen and Ugachukwu. Now, one player who I really wanted to speak about, I noticed in the Sunderland game, the Spurs game, and in the Manchester United game, is Lyle Foster, who's their number 9. Now, as I mentioned just before talking about Leeds, they didn't really have this sort of clinical number 9, but what they do have is Joel Perreault, who's a bit more of this in-between player. Now, Lyle Foster scored against Manchester United, brilliantly taken goal, but he is really, really good in front of the defence. I think he scored a goal against Manchester United, of course, where he sort of drops out the back line and it asks the question of these players. Now, as he drops into the back line, because this left back is sort of pushed up here, they can access him. They actually had a chance against Sunderland where the left back gets to the edge of the box like this, they drag all the players in, and then Jadon Anthony is asking the question of this centre-half. So Lyle Foster's stepped out in front, and then he's passed the ball into Lyle Foster. The back line has jumped because he's a centre-forward. He's the most dangerous man they want to be looking after. And then that leaves Jadon Anthony with this slip ball down the line. I think he cut it back, and I think it was either just gone out on the byline or it was a foul inside the box. But they actually have some pretty nifty sort of patterns in their attack. And whilst they don't have maybe the quality that the other teams do, I think Scott Parker has been here before. Obviously, Daniel Farke has as well. But Scott Parker's been here before, and he kind of has a lot of lessons that he's learned. So, yeah, it's a very interesting one. I'm not as big on Burnley as I am on the other two teams, simply because of probably the transfer recruitment. I think if you look at sort of the angles they've all taken, you can argue that Sunderland have brought in young, energetic, feisty, and they signed from Ligue 1, the Belgian Pro League. These are leagues that on the up-to-date are for running, distance covered, intensity sprints. They've got a really, really high numbers in comparison to the Premier League. So their adaptability, they've got Granit Xhaka, who's obviously got that experience. But then alongside Granit Xhaka, they've signed players like Reynaldo, who's played for Atletico Madrid, Gertruder, who's played in the Champions League, he's won titles, he's played in Germany. They've got these players, and then I think Leeds have sort of addressed somewhat maybe of a height, like a lack of height problem. I think Yakabillo, we're yet to see him start for Leeds, but he's a player who I really like. We all watched him in the Euros. Phenomenal, massive defender who can head everything away from in the box. So when they're playing against these bigger oppositions, he can do that. I think they've signed Anton Stack in midfield, brilliant player. But obviously the lack of centre forward, again, as I must come to, is a bit of an issue there. With Burnley, I'm not too big on their recruitment. I think Ugachukwu is a brilliant, brilliant player. I think they've actually kind of cheated the market kind of getting him. I think he's a couple steps above maybe where Burnley should be knocking about. But I think Ugachukwu, Florentino Luis, Kyle Walker, I liked Hartman's performance against Manchester United. Yeah, I really hope that this can be the season that the relegation curse sort of ends, because the league needs competitiveness and we need fresh faces. It's so good to see Leeds and Sunderland back in the Premier League. New faces, hard grounds to go to. They make for great games of football. But not only that, the recruitment, the way the teams play, none of them are being stubborn to their sort of managers' ideas. They're all playing in a way that kind of empowers their squad. Even Burnley are doing that, who are obviously a team that have kept most of their principles the same, but they are going to be on the back foot a lot more this season. They have the fifth sort of fastest direct speed in the Premier League. They're playing a lot longer. If you watch the goals against Sunderland, even though they're playing Championship opposition, they're counter-attacking. They're using their pace. They're using their sort of Lyle Foster, Jadon Anthony, Mabry on the second balls, Larson out wide, Ugochukwu making these long darts in here with the space to drive into. Yeah, I hope this is the season it breaks. They've got off to an absolute flying start, and please let us know in the comment description who you actually back to stay up out of these. If it's one, if it's two, if it's maybe all three. But I think the good thing about this league at the moment is, for me, I'm struggling to pick three teams I fancy to like go down. I'm struggling to actually put in my mind who I think are the favourites to go down this season. So, yeah, very, very interesting start from the Premier League new boys, and yeah, let's see how they get on. So if you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment and follow the channel. And we'll be back next week for some more analysis on the breakdown, and we'll join you then. Thank you.